Can a soul ever find rest if injustice pursues it beyond the grave? Dive with us as we unravel the tragic tapestry of Sarah Baartman, a life used, abused, and forever remembered. But how did the world, so ravenous for the unusual, become the cage that ensnared her? Let's find it out. Born amid the rolling hills of South Africa's Gamtoos Valley, Sashura, later known as Sarah Baartman or the diminutive Sartji, was the embodiment of the spirit of the indigenous Khoisan people. Yet her life was a tapestry woven with threads of tragedy. Historians whisper her birth was around 1789, but the exact date remains shrouded in mystery, much like the shadows that veiled her life. Before she could even grasp the concept of family, the cruel winds of fate blew away both of her parents. The whisper of a lullaby from her mother silenced when Sarah was but 2, and her father taken abruptly by bushmen during a routine herding. In the aftermath of this twofold tragedy, she found herself in the hands of Pieter Willem Caesar, a Dutch trader who rebranded her identity, christening her Sartji. Life's tempest took her to Cape Town, where she wore the chains of servitude. Her heart bled once more when her infant child, a symbol of hope, was snatched away by the relentless hands of death. The bright lights of Cape Town ought to have been a sign of promise for Sartji, but instead they were a witness to the beginning of a new chapter in which she was exploited. Hendrik Caesars did not see her as a woman, but rather as a golden goose, and he displayed her at several shows throughout the city. Alexander Dunlop, a man of science who was oblivious to humanity, saw her contours, which were a symptom of statopegia, with avarice rather than respect. She was not Sarah to him. Rather, she was the Hottentot Venus, an item, a show, and a life that had been reduced to a display. Although Sarah's body was a symbol of the Khoisan people's natural beauty, it also served as a prison for her spirit when it came under the scrutiny of Europeans. The final curtain call of her life was not to a standing ovation, but rather to the suffocating stillness of exploitation, wherein lies the poetic irony. A life that was born free and amidst nature was put on display, and displayed in foreign places like it was a mere artifact. Even in death, a lady was robbed of dignity, her life echoing like a haunting melody through the corridors of history. But who were the puppeteers pulling the strings of this macabre show? Let's peel back the layers of this haunting narrative in the next few minutes. Baartman discovered that she was stuck in the twisted web of her destiny, locked between options that she barely understood. The unrelenting pressure from Dunlop seemed like a storm she couldn't outrun, and she finally gave in with a tired resignation, imposing one condition: that Hendrik Caesars accompany her on this journey into the unknown. Caesars, who was at first as unyielding as an immovable boulder, eventually capitulated in the year 1810, given that she is illiterate. One has to ask if the signed contract she was confronted with was nothing more than a riddle, its terms beyond her ability to comprehend. Did she knowingly enter into this agreement, or was she trapped by forces that are beyond her control? Dunlop painted her as an enigma of nature, a mere spectacle. Like a caged bird, she was exhibited at London's bustling Piccadilly Circus, draped in tight-fitting attire, beads and feathers, reduced to an exotic caricature. For a mere shilling, the curious could gaze upon her semi-clothed form, and for those with deeper pockets, the chilling privilege to touch her. Whispers suggest that Baartman's very physique, so exploited, might have sparked the Victorian era's bustle trend, a haunting echo of her profound impact. The lack of illumination in her display was not ignored by anyone. After the landmark Slave Trade Act of 1807, which put an end to the trade but did not break the bonds of slavery, Baartman's public display sparked a raging debate among those who advocated for the abolition of slavery. The African Association, which is a watchdog for human rights, has been demanding that she be set free. Caesars, in an attempt to defuse the situation, said defensively, "Has she not as good a right to exhibit herself as an Irish giant or a dwarf?" In response to the outcry, a comparison that chillingly reflects the warped perceptions that are prevalent in society. Unsatisfied by the shadows put over Baartman's situation, the association boldly embraced the mantle of justice and challenged Caesars and Dunlop in court. Nevertheless, in a quiet chamber, where the truth is frequently hushed and covered up, Baartman's voice reverberated for a total of 3 drawn-out hours. She vouched for Dunlop, creating an impression of freedom and willpower in the process. But the issue that lingered beneath her words was she a free bird, or was she a songbird that was imprisoned in a golden cage? Even though the judge detected some hints of coercion in her testimony, he was unable to do anything about it because the evidence did not support his position, and the case was dismissed prematurely. This judicial drama, rather than liberating Baartman from her bonds, ironically stoked the flames of her public attractiveness in Britain. This allure, which later dwindled and led her on a journey to Limerick, Ireland in 1812, was something that she had in the beginning, but eventually lost. As the leaves of 1814 began to turn golden, Baartman found herself in France, where she was transferred from hand to hand among the elite of French society. She was like a tiny flower that was crushed under their imposing grandeur. Enter Henry Taylor, who is followed shortly after by Jean Rayo, who is the most vicious of her prisoners. Baartman's once dazzling spirit began to wane when he was trapped in Rayo's crushing grip at the Palace Royal in Paris. Rachel Holmes, in her moving portrayal, The Hottentot Venus, The Life and Death of C.R.G. Baartman, paints a life tainted by vice and the potential for forced debauchery. She does this by sketching a frightening image of Baartman's spiral into despair. In the days of her radiant youth, Baartman danced and sang, her spirit resilient and unyielding. Yet under Rox's shadow, she became a mere spectacle, a creature led around by chains of exploitation. Artists and pseudoscientists hungrily dissected her form, fueling both scientific bigotry and prurient curiosities. Tragically, she was paraded like a rare gem, her essence coveted by the opulent, leaving her essence forever etched as a symbol of heart-wrenching exploitation. At the tender age of 26 in 1815, Sarah Baartman's flame was extinguished, felled by a potent mix of diseases, perhaps aggravated by the weight of her sorrows and her growing vices. The rivers of anguish she held back flowed freely as wine and tobacco became her solace. Georges Cuvier, rather than granting Baartman the dignity she deserved even in death, saw her not as a fellow human, but as a mere artifact. Instead of a compassionate autopsy, he chose to cast her body in cold plaster, dissecting her with morbid curiosity. Her very essence was captured and displayed in a macabre fashion at the Museum of Man in Paris until 1974, as if she were a specimen rather than a soul. With a gaze clouded by prejudice, Cuvier proclaimed that Baartman's physicality stood testament to sexual primitivism and, chillingly, equated her intellect to that of an orangutan. He wielded her remains as a tool to cement a deeply flawed thesis on racial hierarchy, with dark intentions of placing black individuals on the same pedestal as mere beasts. The bitter irony lay in the fact that Baartman, the woman they reduced to a sideshow, was multilingual, versed in her mother tongue, Dutch, English, and even fragments of French. Years later, the winds of justice whispered her name as Nelson Mandela, then helming South Africa, beckoned for Baartman's remains to return home. France, after initial reluctance, surrendered to the moral imperative. And in 2002, Baartman found solace in her motherland's embrace, finally resting in the heart of Hanky, Eastern Cape. 187 years after her spirit had departed. Sarah Baartman's life, woven with threads of despair and exploitation, serves as a bleak tapestry reminding us of bygone cruelties and the undying need for humanity. As you traverse her journey with us, let the embers of justice and compassion kindle within you. If Baartman's narrative stirs your soul, we implore you to voice your reflections in the comments, championing justice for a soul wronged by time. Like, share, and subscribe, for histories like Baartman's must never fade into oblivion. Your voice has power. Use it to echo her legacy. Thank you for journeying with us through this poignant chapter.